Ooh, Valve is doing a handheld.
Yes!
And it's a 720-30 FPS machine.
Yes!
But now that the initial shock hype of the announcement has stabilized, there's a number of super interesting things about Valve's strategy that I have seen very few people mention. To be fair, Valve's marketing pulled a hell of a strategic move with their timing. It is obvious that they too have been following the rumors of the supposed Switch Pro. If you watch my latest video, the deep dive into the story and technology of the original Game Boy, you might already know that Nintendo has a trend of using mature and cheap technology over anything bleeding edge, so it was unsurprising to discover that the new Switch is, in terms of graphical technology, pretty much still the same. Which is a growing concern, given how much the Switch is already struggling with some third-party games. And along comes Valve, and just a bit over a week after Nintendo drops the announcement of a console not far from the Nintendo Switch OLED in terms of pricing, with a much newer architecture and a promised enormous library of games to also launch on this holiday season in selected markets. Oh god. Well, I'm always a bit concerned about anything that fans the fire of weird internet console war tribalism. I can't help but appreciate the genius move of the timing, and that's not the only marketing trick Valve used, and that leaves them in a simultaneously fantastic and terrible position. Let me explain.
Attention.
Portable gaming, in general, is in a very weird position. On one side you have phones with a variety of pricing options, but that have relentlessly conditioned players to expect free or extremely cheap software, to the point that most mainstream attempts to sell premium games have ended up in catastrophe. The phone, as a technological platform, is perfectly able to play AAA games, but consumer expectations hold them back to the point that precious little consoles or PC games make it there, usually as a free-to-play adaptation or via cloud streaming. Now, for premium games, you have handhelds, which for decades have been completely dominated by Nintendo, despite repeated attempts by their competitors to break their stronghold. By the way, I'm working on the highly requested video on the story of the Game Boy Color and how all of its technology was a response to Nintendo trying to stifle handheld competition. Subscribe so you don't miss that. And then you got laptops, which technically count but are not quite handheld, and are significantly more expensive due to being general-purpose machines. This year there has been an explosion in startups and small companies releasing handhelds made from laptop components that can run PC games to, honestly, great success considering their limited availability. However, these were laptop price, which, along with some other problems, limited their mainstream appeal to an audience that was going to inevitably compare them to the Nintendo Switch. Why these startups are consistently unable to compete with the Switch in price is the topic of an in-depth video I already made, on which I also argue as to why Valve might be the only company on Earth that could pull off a cheaper PC handheld. I did that video before the Steam Deck was announced, and it appears I was about 90% right, so I recommend you watch it if you want a full understanding of Valve's strategy. But now that the announcement is out, I wanted to explore some of the interesting decisions Valve took in this device and in this announcement, and the impact that might have in the industry from several angles. Starting with
Protection team alert.
the Steam Deck pricing comes in 3 tiers, where the only thing that changes is disk capacity, something I did not expect and is fucking genius. In traditional marketing, there is this concept called a loss leader, where a certain product will be sold at a loss in a store with the idea that it will draw people in that would inevitably buy other high-margin products. If you ever have gone to an IKEA just for the cheap food, this explains why the food area is not at the start, but makes you navigate half the store to get there. The food is often sold at a loss, and they're trying to get you to pick other items on your way there. It is my belief that this handheld right here is doing a similar purpose. Gavin said during an interview that getting to that price point was painful, and I believe him, because the entire point of this option is to fill the internet with headlines, tweets and forum posts about how Valve just introduced a PC-based Nintendo Switch competitor. But did they? Everything about the cheapest Steam Deck is very strategic. They choose to retain the same fantastic general specs, which means avoiding creating multiple expensive production lines, and they changed the smallest, smartest thing they could. the hard drive. Consider the following. This price tier exists to convince a mainstream audience that is going to compare it to a Nintendo Switch. The same audience that is probably not going to care about how fast its storage is and is going to be fine just using an SD card. And also the same audience that is not going to void the guarantee and risk damaging their expensive device by opening it to replace the hard drive. I am willing to bet that Valve is likely losing money or being very close to cost on this tier, and probably fabricating less of them. And meanwhile, they are selling to enthusiasts the way more expensive tiers of the devices at prices that are actually not that different from the very first run of other Windows handhelds. So they get the good press while also engaging in laptop-like pricing and probably making a profit in there too. They're having their cake and eat it too. It's impressive. Valve's own admission that the Steam Deck can run just Windows is fucking genius on several levels. The first is that it completely removes consumer risk on jumping into a new platform, not knowing if it will last and you will lose all the games you have for it. Worst case scenario, this is going to be the more refined version of existing handhelds. And assuming this will work anything like the Steam controller, which looks exactly to be the case, Valve still stands to benefit if people are using this on Windows, as it is very likely that to get the controller to work properly, you will need to add all games to Steam, which just nudges you towards buying all your games there instead of Epic, Ubisoft or whatever. But the real trick, that's getting you to stay on SteamOS, their own operating system and ecosystem where Steam is the easiest choice for buying games that are easier for users to just use. I recently received a sample of another unrelated handheld that you will see a video about soon enough that has a 100GB boot drive, and I was surprised to discover just how much Windows was using, and this was with no software installed. This is just how it came out of the box. Windows is going to have some difficulties on the cheapest version of the Steam Deck. This does not mean that people will still do it. There will be super light versions of custom Windows and dual boost systems to probably use the SD card. People will come up with solutions, but it's going to be so inconvenient that a lot of people in the cheap version are not going to bother unless there's a really good reason to change. Not to mention, Windows is just freaking terrible in this form factor. I hate using Windows 10 on a handheld. I hate it. Windows is not designed for a touchscreen, and the option for tablet mode is hidden away when it detects you're in a desktop, like it did here. And even if Windows is just a matter of getting used to it, most software and game stores are an absolute pain to navigate without a mouse. And if I can barely stand it, I cannot imagine how it's going to go with someone used to the convenience of a Nintendo Switch. Technology enthusiasts tend to dramatically underestimate how much of a convenience and straightforward user experience matter for the mainstream consumer. So this may actually play in Valve's favor. The big question is Windows 11, which is planned to come around the same time as the Steam Deck. According to Microsoft, Windows 11's interface is being optimized for ease of use in touchscreens as well, but if my past experiences with the new Windows version is anything to go by, this will not be a super smooth design translation, and some stores will continue to really suck there. Not to mention that even if it does, Microsoft has to deal with so many legacy and security issues that it's just terribly unideal for this sort of device. As I said before, I'm pretty much using my Windows handhelds daily, and at least once a week, my game is stuttering and freezing unexpectedly. Why? Because Windows is updating in the background. This happens really often. Imagine a Nintendo Switch just randomly micro-freezing because Nintendo decided to update it for you in the background. This is an opportunity for Valve. Valve has been chasing an opportunity to escape Windows for a long time. They had correctly identified that having their entire business rely on someone else's platform is dangerous, especially when someone is growingly becoming a competitor. Previous attempts to deal with this went very badly, but years of development had led to a golden opportunity to introduce their Linux-based SteamOS 3.0 to a mainstream audience in a convenient form factor. Wait, 3 price options? SteamOS 3? Is Valve telling us something? This bet on Linux could go wrong for 2 reasons. The first is that Proton compatibility, while it has improved a lot, it's still not exactly at a level where mainstream users can just reliably press play and expect it to work. Now, according to the Steam Deck developer video, there has been a lot of changes in Proton to improve this that have yet to hit the public version, and they're confident enough that they're aiming to have every Steam game working by launch, but that's a tall order for something coming out this year. The other is that this is coming on a critical moment in Steam's position in the PC industry. Years ago, if you had told me of a device that is designed to primarily play Steam games, that would not have been much of a problem, but over the last few years, Epic has literally spent millions to build up people's libraries on the Epic Store. Game Pass is just really rad, and Ubisoft is trying something. So SteamOS better be convenient, and just in general very good, just to get people not to switch to Windows immediately. You can see that Valve is aware of this and are smartly leaning into the sort of customizations that you can do on Linux but never on Windows, such as promises of a suspend feature similar to the very convenient one you will find on the Switch. So hopefully this, as well as the redesigned big picture mode, are convenient enough to actually convince people to stay in their ecosystem. This seems to mirror closely their reported approach to game piracy. Gabe Newell has famously claimed in the past that they approach piracy as a better service problem, only that in this case the thing to avoid using a better service is Windows rather than games downloaded through piracy websites. The open source community nature of Linux also can provide a needed boost in this regard. For example, you might have heard that there's quite a bit of noise lately among PC gaming regarding the concept of scaling technologies, or methods to take a lower resolution image and make it a higher resolution to save on performance. On one side, you have NVIDIA Deep Learning Supersampling, which uses machine learning to honestly do some really magical stuff, but requires a fancy, expensive, newer NVIDIA GPU and is difficult to implement per game. On the other side, you have AMD Fidelity FX, which is simpler. It does not reconstruct images with machine learning, so you cannot expect miracles, but it can do decent results on some resolutions and works on almost every GPU. And the most important part for today is open source, meaning that other developers can come up with ways to mix it with other open source software. Which is exactly what is happening, because there's already progress on incorporating this AMD technology into Proton by the community, potentially allowing lower resolution games to look better on SteamOS and boost performance. There's a lot of jank associated with using an open source OS, and community projects like this make it doubly so, but it does open the door to a lot of features that will be much harder to pull off in Windows. So Valve has pulled a hell of a marketing trick here that actually has captured mainstream interest on handheld consoles. There's a lot of questions left, one which is actual performance. Based on the specs alone, this should be, in games, significantly better than the already impressive Aya Neo, which I explored in its own video in the corner that has, no joke, become one of my main daily gaming machines. However, for someone following handhelds, it is already easy to conceptualize this as a medium settings 30 FPS machine for really heavy titles. But given that the device relies on a Steam library, I am concerned a lot of the early adopters will come at this from a traditional PC mentality, and that PC mentality of expecting 60 FPS or high settings out of everything just does not work with the real limitations of a battery-operated handheld device. There's already a lot of speculation of what full tower PC this can compare with, but when you operate on a device like this where temperatures need to be low not to burn your hands and battery life needs to be usable, performance can get weird. I am expecting a souped up Aya Neo, and this is very much not a 60 FPS device for very heavy games, and if you actually embrace that, the sky is the limit. But will the first round of consumers have realistic expectations? With a product like this, the first day impressions or reviews are going to matter a lot. I want this product category to succeed, to prove once and for all that PC gaming is being limited by this obsession with high-end, huge power consumption PC towers, and that its flexibility should be celebrated. And this is the first major chance there is to change some minds in a long time. I guess we'll find out later this year.